Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, which is India's first Future Tech Meets Sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Watanabe Masataka, who is the Associate Professor at Department of Systems Innovation, Faculty of Engineering, the University of Tokyo. He heads the Watanabe Laboratory and specializes in theoretical and experimental neuroscience with particular focus on consciousness, machine consciousness, spiking neural networks, brain-machine interface, with the vision to upload mind or mind uploading, as you call it. And he's the author of From Biological to Artificial Consciousness. So, Professor, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast.
Thank you for your interest. Yes.
Why don't we start with a small, brief introduction and background?
I started out as a theoretical neuroscientist in Tokyo University. There I met this visual illusion called binary rivalry. Maybe I can explain in detail later, but that it's kind of a tool to experimentally approach visual consciousness. That was a sabbatical in Caltech in Shimojo lab. Then I came back to Japan. I started working with RIKEN, with the functional MRI, but then at some point I thought I really need to actually insert electrodes in animal brains to really decipher the neural mechanism of consciousness. And that's where when I decided to go to the Max Planck Institute in Germany, that's the Tübingen campus where Professor Nikos Logotisis was there. He's the kind of founder of experimental conscious research, where he actually used this visual illusion binary rivalry, trained the monkeys, and he recorded multiple visual areas to try to find the seed of consciousness. And after that, I kind of did that kind of study. I moved my animal model to rodents so that I can use optogenetics, some advanced techniques in neuroscience. And then at some point, I thought, I really want to really directly approach the real mystery of consciousness. And that is, in Nagel's words, consciousness is defined as something that is like to be. And to really directly assess that, I made a non-standard approach to consciousness, where I try to build a conscious machine and then test this conscious machine. And later on, this technique would lead to mind uploading.
Professor, really appreciate you sharing your journey and your work in the field. So consciousness, obviously, we want to get into that later, because it's a subject which is, it's very hazy and it's very unclear at this point in time. So before we get into consciousness, I think it'll really be nice if you could, talk about what are our current understanding of the human brain. How much do we know about it at this point in time, so that we can possibly first structurally and functionally maybe map out the brain, and then we where are we in the current understanding of a human brain today?
Well, it's hard to say. I think there's been more than 50 years of research, and there has been quite big progress, so I would say. And then again, if you compare to other fields in science, we might say we almost know nothing about the brain in real detail. So it's hard to say. There's been lots of progress, amazing studies showing the mechanism of brain functions. There are multiple Nobel Prize winning studies, but to ultimately decipher the neural mechanism itself, I think we're still quite far away.
There are lots of neuroscientists, working on understanding the human brain. There's Henry Markham at the Blue Brain Project, who's working on digital reconstruction of the human brain. Yeah. And I've had the privilege to speak to Kenneth Hayworth from Brain Preservation, who's trying to preserve the entire human brain. And I've also spoken to Randall Coney on the podcast, who's looking at whole brain emulation. What, according to you, is or could be the possible, best possible way for us to understand human brain? Or are there any other approaches that you can talk about which will lead us to possibly understand or a complete human brain, not a specific
Mhm.
part of the human brain.
Yes. So that's actually like one of the take-home message of my like big approach to this consciousness is that I'm gonna try to directly connect like a large scale, like a neural network, artificial one, to our brain, and we would have a massive intercommunication using this special BMI, brain machine interface. So I feel, I do these conventional like neuroscience methods, like invasive or non-invasive. It's always the non-invasive methods are always like very, very indirect. And then the invasive methods, actually inserting an electrode in the brain, you do have direct access to what the neurons are doing or what they're talking, chit-chatting. But then again, you have access to only like 0.0001% of the neurons of the whole brain. And I would say this lack of progress in modern neuroscience comes from the lack of our ability to try in observing the biological brain. So, for my purpose to, decipher neuromechanism of consciousness, I go for this strategy. But even for standard neuroscience, I would believe that this method, connecting a large like an AI machine to our brains, or maybe not first to our brains, but animal brains, would really kind of revolutionize how we, approach the brain in terms of like learning the mechanism.
Yeah, so you mentioned about neurons chit-chatting. Now, these
Yes.
100 billion neurons, 100 trillion synapses, the way they fire and fire creates the language of, us understanding the spatial awareness, sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, it all comes up. So,
Yep.
so when you say neurals chit-chatting, is there there's a language going on behind, and do you think that we will ever be able to understand the language of neurons?
Well, the language of neurons is, say, it's very simple. This is what Hodgkin and Huxley have discovered, like before the Second World War, just before. So in the end, it's like just a more signal with this short one. It goes dit, 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 dit. So that's what the neurons are doing. And, this itself is quite simple, I would say. But the big mystery lies when, 100 billion neurons, like they start communicating together to form this massive, massive, complex hyperparallel neural network. So the small, like the very smallest units is quite well understood. But when they gather together, it becomes a big mystery.
So Professor, tell me, what was it that nudged you to go for this huge vision of mind uploading? What was that little nudge that, and maybe before you get into what drove you to get into mind uploading, I think it'll be very nice if you could also explain what mind uploading is to my listeners.
Maybe I can start by the end state, the final state of mind uploading, what it's going to be, like once you are actually uploaded. And so I would do this like a 3-step digitization experiment, thought experiment. So first, I would digitize the environment. So that means, we still use our bodily sensors, we use our actual muscles, but whatever outside our skin is all digitized. So now the environment is just a computer simulation. This is already, partially, it's already done. So this is like, like virtual reality, like the metaverse, you know what I mean? So that part is already done, or like half done, like digitizing the environment. The second process to reach the final state of mind uploading is to digitize your body. So let's say, have you watched the movie Matrix?
One of my favorite movies.
Yeah, great. So, well, you know that in the it's actually the second sequence of the movie where like Neo, it's like Keanu Reeves is sitting in a kind of a dark room with his computer on and it's flashing, and he thinks it's the real world. And us watching the movie, we also think it's a real world. But then like 20, 30 minutes later, like once he takes this red pill, you notice that that's not real anymore. It's just, his brain was directly connected to like a digital computer. So idealistically, if you can substitute all input and output with a digital computer and directly connect that to our brain with a full like brain machine interface, in principle, we can totally fool the brain, because in the end, our bodily sensors, tactile, heat, like pressure, also, like our eyes, our ears, the cochlea, the brain is always taking in sensor input as a digital, like an electronic pulse. And when the brain tries to communicate, output its motor command to our body and actually manipulate our muscles, it is also doing so via like electronic pulses. So it's, in this sense, it's an electronic circuit. So if you can replace our body, like both input and output, and simulate that on a digital computer, where in that digital computer already the environment is already digitized, you can completely fool the brain. That just like the movie, Neo believes that he's really living in a real world. If we can manage to do that, and in principle, we can completely fool the brain, have full immersiveness, just like we would feel, just like how we feel we live in this real world. So that's the second digitization of the body. The final part is how we can digitize our brain. So there's this thought experiment called the fading qualia. This is done by Chalmers. And I think maybe you noticed the twist. I claim, and I also admit that we haven't fully deciphered the neural mechanism of the brain itself. But then again, I still say this endeavor of, approaching neural mechanism consciousness and even mind uploading, I would say if I have the sufficient monetary resource, I can pull it off in 20 years. So this twist is kind of arises, you can understand, arises from this thought experiment. So let's say I see this, brown cup. I have this visual awareness or visual consciousness of this brown cup, and Chalmers would start replacing my neurons with a silicon neuron, one by one. So what it's doing is we know that our brain, the neural circuitry, is composed of neurons, and what they're doing, there are multiple input, single output, units, and they are all, they are not directly connected. In the end, they communicate through like neurotransmitters. They are chemical substances. So let's say we replace the single neuron to a silicon neuron. And if we can manage to fully replicate the connectivity and also fully replicate the input-output functions of the single neuron with a silicon neuron, the brain would not notice that it has been swapped. So, there would be no change in the neurodynamics, of the circuitry. So you go one by one, you start inserting silicon neurons, and the big question is, okay, would there be some point where this sense of seeing this brown cup, would it start to fade away? Like we go 50% point, we cross that, and maybe you replace my one final existing biological brain. Would there be any moment where this consciousness just somehow fades away? And Chalmers would claim it won't, because the gradual replacement of silicon to a biological silicon neurons kind of assures that the objective calculations or the neural function is all preserved. So this is how, we can turn our brain into a super, 3D, like a massive silicon hardware. Yeah, but this is still not digital yet. So I have this small hack. So instead of inserting a silicon neuron, I call this the digital fading qualia. Instead of inserting a silicon neuron, I can take these neurons into a supercomputer. If I have a ultimate brain-machine interface, we can still, the first neuron, there's no difference. The brain would never notice. Then, I keep on taking in these neurons to the supercomputer. Maybe the second, third neuron might be a little slightly different because I might take in neurons that were directly monosynaptically connected in the biological brain. But then again, if we also emulate and simulate the whole neural circuitry, then again, the brain would not notice the difference. So we can keep on taking in neurons in the supercomputer and start calculating it. And almost with the exact same assumptions of the fading qualia, this end product, it's just now the brain is just, calculated in a supercomputer. This calculated neurocircuitry or calculated brain should also be conscious. So
Right.
see, we have digitized the environment, digitized the body, digitized the brain, and it's at that point, we are nothing but just calculations on a digital Neumann type computer. But this thought experiment tells you that if this all works, we would be living just as like how we
Forever.
are living in the real world.
Forever.
We would not notice the difference, yes.
Right. So you said there's this three process to it. First is to create digital simulation in virtual reality. B is digitize the body. When you say digitize the body, you entire genome code, I assume. C.
No, you don't need the entire genome code. You just need to know how the body works.
Right. And C is digitize the brain, the entire brain. And then 4 is create a neural network so strong then you can upload it onto the computer, and you are assuming that the brain, that if we structurally and functionally we are able to copy the entire human brain, and when we upload it onto a neural network, it should have the consciousness also, because you're assuming that the consciousness arises. So two questions over here. Why do we need to digitize the entire body? Isn't us, I mean, as humans, everything is just the brain, because a sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, whatever of five spatial senses, it arises because out of a human. So do we actually need to digitize the entire body, or would just the brain do? And when you talking about this uploading it onto a digital substrate, which is possibly what kind of what kind of supercomputer would require it for a human brain to be alive? Or I mean, when I say alive, to be, thrive in this digital environment, it's exactly like, the Matrix.
Okay, so let me just answer with the later, the second easier question. It's not just me, but a lot of scientists believe that maybe in 10 years, we will have the full capability of simulating the whole human brain, like in 10 years. But it depends, it depends on how complex these neurons needs to be. So in this thought experiment, the fading qualia, or my small hack, the digital fading qualia, the neuron has to fully replicate, and that's for safety measures. You know what I mean? But most probably we don't need to fully replicate. So there's a good chance that we can actually pull this off in 10 years. And you're asking me whether, do you need, or do I need to also digitize the body? So that's a very interesting point. Like actually in the real world, real brain, there are special cases where almost like a brain in a jar is conscious. The brain, when it's totally segregated from the environment, it is still conscious, and that is the case of like dreaming while REM sleeping. So the REM sleep, we know that, you know, REM is rapid eye movement. We know the eyes are moving, but except for that, if you put like muscle, like electrography, we notice that during this REM sleep, there's almost no muscle movement. So the body, or you know, the brain is almost completely segregated from the body and also from the environment, but still we can have a like full 3D environment, completely independent from the actual world. We can walk through that, you know, we can you know, drop a plate and it will shatter in pieces. But you know, this is a clear case where, you know, the brain alone, almost the brain alone, why I say almost is because this, you know, this the segregation from the environment is not fully complete. You know, if you make a loud noise, you know, the guy would wake up, this person would wake up. So it's not fully segregated, but at least it's, you know, it's not relying on that signal. So we know in the real world case, it is true that the brain alone can become conscious, but that's a very special case. And if you want to have a full awake condition in the uploaded environment, I would say it's better to have your body. So, you know, there's something different in the REM sleeping, you know, brain and the awake brain. And we know that the REM sleeping brain is not complete. You know, you don't have all of your like capabilities.
So, Professor, you mentioned about this three-pronged approach of
Mhm.
mind uploading, digitizing, the environment, creating a simulation, digitizing the body, digitizing the brain, and then possibly creating a neural network, and then uploading this. So, are there any others who are thinking around these lines or walking towards? Because last I know, maybe somebody mapped out the entire neural connectome of a C. elegans worm and then
Yeah.
upload it onto a connectome. Are there anyone else who are working in that lines? B, what would be the problems? Because it's not that easy. Because as soon as we copy the entire structural and functional capabilities of possibly the body and the brain and have a simulation and upload it, we also create the problem of multiple copies. Because as soon as we have a copy, then I could be like, for example, if it's me, then somebody else could just replace, cut, and there would be 50 or 100 copies of me. What are the problems also you see of this?
Okay, so let me okay, now I will try to answer from the first one. Maybe if I forget your second, just remind me of that. So yeah, like you said, all other methods, what they're trying to do is they're trying to use like invasive connectome to upload the human mind. So in the end, so you said 15 years, so we had C. elegans, and now we have the whole Drosophila brain, the fruit fly brains, maybe partial mouse brains and things. But okay, so one thing is that these techniques, in the end, most probably would not provide us with a full, you know, quantitative synaptic connectivity. So these methods will not be able to fully replicate, extract the sufficient precision of synaptic connectivity to fully replicate a dynamic brain. So this is because, these techniques work like this. You take out a dead brain, you wait for the animal or the human to die, crack the skull, take the brain out, you slice it up into very thin slices, like 2-3 microns. And then you start, scanning with scanning electron microscopy, and you stack the images. Then you can kind of follow the axons or the fibers in 3D, so that at least you know like which neurons are directly connected to which neurons. But then again, the very important point of trying to replicate the brain is to know the exact quantitative values of the synaptic connectivity. And that again is, it's like in the angstrom order. So the slice is in 2-3 micron order, and the axons can be, the thick ones can be like 6-7 microns in diameter. But the synapse is very, very small, and it's very difficult to actually try to measure the synapse. There are modern techniques, for example, using gold particles to maybe visualize some specific ion channels, but in the end, most probably this would not be sufficient. So that means this copying method with extracted brain would not work. But let's say, well, maybe it does work at some point. The problem is, like, would you be okay with that? This procedure only happens after you're actually dead. So this is why, like, there are like MIT spin-off startups like Nectome, but they all rely on this method. First of all, I think it's not possible in the first place. Second, if it is possible, it would be a deal killer for most of us. See, I'm the one who don't want to die, but I would have to die to go through this procedure. So my uploading methods is very, very different from that. So, but then again, this three-step digitization, the final part, the brain digitization, is also not possible. See, when I say this, Nectome style, like brain extract brain, like making a full digital copy of the brain method is not possible. It also means that this digital fading quality, a thought experiment, is just a thought experiment, and it's not going to be possible, because when you start replacing these neurons with like digital neurons, we're assuming that the full connectivity. So see, I'm violating my own rules. So what I'm going to do, instead of like replacing neuron one by one, I'm going to replace a whole hemisphere. See, so the human brain is composed of two hemispheres, the left and right hemisphere. And there's a nice dividing line where we have all the neural fibers kind of like concentrated in a very nice parallel manner that communicates between these two hemispheres. So my method would be actually, it might sound a little mysterious, but I would make a machine or a artificial spiking neural network that is already conscious. See how I would do that I would rely on modern deep learning techniques. I would use this human invasive connectome, which should be available maybe in 10 years or so. So at least we know the full discrete connectivity, like which neuron is connected to which. But I would say the quantitative values would not be sufficient. So what I would do is I would train this huge spiking neural network using, for example, video material, if you want to make a visual like area that is visually conscious. And maybe, you might need a body to train a visual system. If so, I will just provide it with a virtual body. So anyway, my point is I would like pre-arrange or, a neural network that is already conscious, kind of neutrally conscious, by using like all like existing sensory like motor material. Then what I would do is I would connect this machine to one of my hemispheres. And according to my hypothesis, it would not be so difficult to integrate the two consciousness, the biological stream of consciousness, and if any, like machine consciousness, because I have this big idea of like my super invasive like a brain machine interface where I insert like a high dimensional 2D array of electrodes in the corpus callosum, anterior and posterior commissure, and if the technique progresses and if the pitch of the arrays become like in the like few hundred nanometer order, like today it's around 2-3 microns, so like 10 folds more, we would be able to completely read and write independently from these neural fibers that are connecting the two biological hemispheres. So let's say I have a machine that is conscious already. I connect it with the biological hemisphere, and the consciousness is integrated. And using this fact that the two are integrated in terms of consciousness, I can also transfer a memory from the biological side to the mechanical side. So there will be a point where, as the two biological left and right hemispheres are integrated into terms of consciousness and sharing memories, I believe that there will be a point that, this is happening between a biological and mechanical hemisphere. Let's say this happens. So what would happen at the time of this inevitable death of the biological side? So I would just come back to myself again. So my two biological hemispheres are there, but let's say unfortunately I suffer a major stroke in one of the hemispheres. Of course, if I'm unlucky, I'm gonna die. But if I do survive, this one single consciousness that resided in the two hemispheres would, move on, or maybe only one side would be intact, but there's no death in between. You know what I mean? Like, I just moved from both sides to single side. All of my consciousness is there. I would suffer with paralysis and everything, but at least I'm not dead. I'm conscious with all my memories. So if I have this relationship between a machine and a biological hemisphere, the exact same thing would happen. So at the point of the biological death, you would move on seamlessly onto the machine side. So this is why I believe that this would be the only, viable method to try to realize true mind uploading, where you don't need to have to die in between. So
Right.
you are the one, or I'm the one who's going to move on. Yeah.
So what is it that will make this possible? And what are the timelines that you're talking about?
See, the machine is I'm going to use a artificial spiking neural network simulated on the digital computer. So I would need to wait for the progress of maybe the world's fastest supercomputer. But a lot of scientists would agree maybe in 10 years we will have it in terms of pure power. And regarding this special a super invasive corpus callosum slicing brain machine interface, the pitch is kind of important. And we know that if you look at the postmortem human brain dissection of the corpus callosum, you would notice the large axonal fibers are 5, 6, 7 microns in diameter. And the small C fibers, they are very thin, but the pitch is around 1/200 to 300 nanometers. So if we have, so today's CMOS, for example, image sensors, their pitch is around 2-3 microns. So maybe in 10 years, we would have 10-fold more increase in the density. Then we would be able to directly read and write to all the axonal fibers that actually is needed to connect the two hemispheres. So I believe that at least in terms of hardware, we would have them ready in maybe 10 years. But why I say, I wouldn't say we can, pull off human mind uploading in 10 years, because at least I know how slow things can be. But then again, what I would think would be the most kind of sophisticated step is to actually, have a sufficiently complex, realistic spiking neural network that, that mimics completely the, the neuron wiring, because like I said, I would use this invasive connectome project to actually start with the human, postmortem brain, synaptic connectivity in terms of discrete values, whether the neurons are connected or not. But then again, I think it's not going to be so easy to get to the right quantum values. even though if we make use of all these modern like deep learning techniques, I would still need quite big team, scientific team to really work on this project. I believe that we can, for example, integrate mechanical visual consciousness, like a mechanical visual cortical hemisphere, and this monkey's cortical hemisphere, and kind of prove that very most likely consciousness has actually arisen in the machine, and it has to be integrated with the stream of consciousness in this monkey's biological hemisphere.
Wish you the very best, and I hope that you come to a point where you have peers, some funding or some company supporting you this direction, because we need brave researchers, scientists such as yourself, kind of probing what is possible, because the world is full of possibilities. You, like you said, you need somebody out there who kind of puts that brave moonshot or vision out there. My last question to you: you've been working on spiking neural networks also, and there are a lot of people who are taking leveraging spiking neural networks for creating neuromorphic computing to enable energy efficient, biologically inspired computing systems. Could you talk about that and your future roadmap?
So the problem with the neuromorphic chips, in the end, in terms of the true architecture, they're not so different from like digital computers, because at least the modern ones, the ones that exist today, let's say the True North by IBM. But then again, if you look at the actual physical neurons, it's only like 4,096. So they are still, today's neuromorphic chips uses time sharing. So the true, they are not truly hyperparallel. Like, you might have virtual 1 million neurons, but physically there are only 4,000. So that, in that sense, I claim that to be in the real safe side, I would say, like, if we can actually have a full hyperparallel, like silicon hardware, where all neurons exist physically, and they're all, complexly connected, just like our human brain. If we can have that, we would be a little more on the safe side, that, it might be a little more likely that consciousness can actually reside in this real hardware. But I believe through my, this digital fading qualia thought experiment, that, almost equally possible. It is almost equally possible that consciousness can reside also on a simulated digital computer. So at this point, so I'm more relying on the big machines, not the neuromorphic chips. But if any scientists are interested, or if the whole field moves on to making neuromorphic chips that are all truly hyperparallel, that would be really nice. Yes.
Right, Professor, I really, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Wish you the very best. And I hope that, like you said, more people come together, though there are a lot of people, and teams and researchers around the world who are going all out brave to possibly emulate the entire brain or create a digital version of the brain, in the hope of possibly maybe not just understanding the brain, but possibly creating machines which could be generally intelligent like us, or possibly mind uploading also. So these are far out things, but I guess once we get to that, I think the world will completely change. There are obviously great things which can happen, but there are also the downsides of it. So I think, as scientists, researchers, the ones who are vested in the space, we need to be very cognizant, because I think the first time in human history, I think we're coming across a technology which is self-learning. and which has the potential of becoming an existential threat also. So eventually, if we create these machines, we don't really know what it could actually do. So I mean, wish you the very best, and I hope that there's more teams that's coming around and creating these brave things, but making sure that whatever we create is helpful for the humanity. So once again, appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.